Welcome to Fluent Daily, the English listening channel for advanced learners at B2 and C1 level. Every episode features a rich, flowing conversation in natural English on a topic that is genuinely worth thinking about: history, psychology, science, philosophy, and more. There are no simplified sentences here, no slow speech, no vocabulary drills. Just real English spoken naturally on ideas that matter. This is Fluent Daily. Let's get into it.
Today we have a great story, so let's get started right now.
So imagine lying on an operating table. You're fully under general anesthesia, and a surgeon stands over you with a scalpel and makes this massive, deep incision across your abdomen.
Right, major surgery.
Exactly. And at that exact moment, billions of specialized nerves in your tissue are just screaming. I mean, they are firing off this unrelenting barrage of chemical and electrical damage signals shooting right up your spinal cord.
Flooding into the brainstem.
Yeah. Your body is in a state of absolute physiological trauma. But you, the person, you feel absolutely zero pain, nothing at all.
Which is fascinating.
It is. And now, contrast that with a completely different scenario. You're an amputee, just sitting quietly in your living room. There's no scalpel, no physical trauma whatsoever.
Because you're missing the limb entirely.
Right. You are missing your left arm. Yet you are experiencing this blinding, agonizing, burning sensation in a left hand that physically does not exist.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate neurological paradox, isn't it?
So,
I mean, we have one scenario with massive tissue destruction and zero pain, and then another with literally zero tissue destruction and massive pain.
and that paradox, that is the entire mission of our deep dive today. Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, and I'm joined by our resident neuroscience expert. And today, we are going to completely demolish this sort of folk understanding of pain that every single one of us was taught growing up.
Because that old model is just entirely flawed.
It really is. We are going to prove to you, the listener, that pain does not actually exist in your body. It's 100% constructed in your brain.
And the way the brain constructs it is just so bizarre. It's incredibly susceptible to your thoughts, your social life, your expectations.
It really forces us to rethink the entire human experience of suffering. So let's just jump right in.
Yeah, and, understanding the architecture of that suffering, it isn't just some abstract philosophical exercise. We are looking at a fundamental biological system here.
A system that dictates the quality of life for billions of people.
Exactly. When we misunderstand how pain is actually generated, we end up building entirely flawed medical systems to treat it.
Which is exactly what happened with the opioid crisis, and we are absolutely going to get into those devastating consequences later in this deep dive. But let's start by dismantling that fundamental myth we all grew up with, the fire alarm model.
Right, the classic input-output idea.
The idea that you touch a hot stove, your skin gets damaged, a signal shoots up your arm like electricity traveling up a copper wire, it hits a little bell in your brain, and boom, you feel pain.
And the worse the burn, the louder the bell.
Exactly. It feels like a direct, passive report of tissue injury. Okay, so let's unpack this. Why is that wrong?
Well, it feels intuitive, sure, but neurobiologically, it's completely backwards. To really understand why, we have to establish a hard boundary between two distinct phenomena: nociception and pain.
Okay. Nociception and pain.
Right. They are not synonyms. Nociception is just the mechanical, chemical, and thermal detection of a stimulus.
Like the raw data.
Exactly. You have this intricate network of specialized sensory neurons called nociceptors. They're distributed all throughout your skin, your joints, your internal organs.
And what's their main job?
Their only job is to monitor for extreme changes. So if the temperature gets too high or the pressure gets too intense, or say there's an acidic chemical change from inflammation.
The nociceptors catch it.
Right. The ion channels on these neurons just pop open. They fire an electrical impulse toward the spinal cord. That is nociception.
So nociception is just raw data collection. It's the physical hardware detecting a change in the environment, nothing more.
Simply a data transfer. I mean, nociception happens constantly without you ever feeling it. Even just sitting in your chair right now listening to this.
Wait, really? Just sitting?
Yeah. The mechanical pressure on your tissues from the chair is triggering nociceptors right now, but your nervous system is filtering it out before it ever reaches your conscious awareness.
Wow. Okay, feel pain is something else entirely.
Pain, on the other hand, is the subjective, conscious experience of discomfort. It's the end product.
Okay, let me try to upgrade the analogy then. It's not a fire alarm directly triggering a siren. Nociception is more like a live feed from a security camera.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The nociceptor is the camera sitting out there in the parking lot of your body picking up some blurry movement in the shadows. But the camera itself doesn't panic.
No, it just sends the data.
It just sends the blurry footage to the control room. The brain is the paranoid security guard sitting in that control room. The guard looks at the footage, looks at the time of day, checks the stress levels, factors in past experiences, and then makes an active decision.
An active decision about whether to hit the panic button and sound the alarm of pain? Yes, that is a perfect way to look at it.
Makes so much more sense.
And sometimes, that security guard is so deeply conditioned to expect a threat that they actually alter the footage to match their own fears.
Oh, wow. So the brain just overrides the raw data.
Exactly. The brain isn't passively receiving a damage report at all. It's calculating what we call a motivational imperative.
A motivational imperative. What does that mean exactly?
Well, evolution didn't give us pain just to inform us about the state of our tissues. It gave us pain to force a change in behavior.
Like telling us to move our hand off the stove.
Right. When the brain computes that your body is under threat, it generates the experience of pain to command you to stop what you're doing, protect the area, and basically seek safety.
Which perfectly explains the phantom limb phenomenon we talked about in the intro. The security guard is so traumatized by the history of the amputation, or maybe the severed nerves at the stump, are sending such erratic, noisy data that the guard just hits the panic button anyway.
Yep. The brain projects the sensation of pain into the spatial map of a limb that is no longer there.
Because the brain's map still exists even if the flesh doesn't. That is wild.
The brain is generating the experience entirely internally. And, we didn't really begin to formalize this scientifically until about 1965.
Right, with Ronald Melzack and Patrick Wall.
Exactly. They introduced a massive paradigm shift called the gate control theory. Before them, the medical consensus was essentially that straight wire input-output model.
The fire alarm.
Right. But Melzack and Wall proved that the spinal cord isn't just a passive relay station, it's an active processing center.
It's the first checkpoint before the signal even gets to the brain. So how does this gate actually work on a cellular level? Like, what's happening?
Okay, so think of the dorsal horn of your spinal cord. That's the back portion of the spinal cord where all these sensory nerves plug in. Think of it as a complex switchboard.
Okay, switchboard.
When a nociceptor fires, the signal travels up a specialized nerve fiber, usually a slow, unmyelinated C fiber. It arrives at the dorsal horn and has to cross a synaptic gap to hand the message off to the next neuron.
The projection neuron that takes it to the brain.
Exactly. But Melzack and Wall discovered that this handover isn't guaranteed. There are inhibitory interneurons sitting right there at the synapse.
And they act as the gates.
Yes, literal gates. If those inhibitory neurons turn on, they block the transmission entirely. The nociceptive signal just dies right there in the spine.
Okay, let's put you, the listener, in a scenario to see how we instinctively manipulate this biology every single day.
Oh, this is a great example.
You are walking barefoot through your house and you brutally stub your toe on the leg of a coffee table.
The worst.
The worst. The nociceptors in your toe erupt. Before you even have a chance to think, what is your immediate evolutionary reaction? You grab your toe and you rub it vigorously.
And by rubbing it, you don't even realize it, but you are exploiting the gate control theory.
How so?
Well, alongside those slow C fibers carrying the damage signal, you have a completely different set of nerves called A beta fibers. These detect light touch, vibration, and mechanical pressure.
The rubbing sensation.
All right, and A beta fibers are thick, and they are heavily insulated with myelin.
Myelin being the fatty coating that allows electrical signals to travel much faster, right?
Vastly faster. So when you stub your toe, the slow damage signal starts trundling up the C fiber toward the spine.
It's taking its time.
Exactly. But when you immediately grab and rub the toe, you trigger those fast A beta touch fibers. The touch signal just sprints up the leg, beats the damage signal to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and activates those inhibitory interneurons we just talked about.
The touch signal literally wins the race and slams the gate shut before the pain signal even arrives.
It hyperpolarizes the projection neuron, making it incredibly difficult for the pain signal to cross the gap. You are physically diluting the pain data by flooding the switchboard with non-threatening touch data.
That is profound. I mean, we don't rub our toe to comfort ourselves psychologically. We are running a localized neurochemical override program on our own spinal cord.
That's a great way to phrase it. But the literature shows that physical touch isn't the only thing that can close that gate. The brain itself can reach down and close it from the top down.
Wait, the brain can shut its own gates.
Oh, absolutely. This is the descending modulatory pain pathway. The brain has its own heavy-duty wiring extending back down into the spinal cord, specifically targeting those same inhibitory gates.
So this is where psychology violently intersects with biology.
Precisely. When you are in a state of extreme stress, intense focus, or fear, think of like a soldier in a firefight or an athlete sprinting for the finish line.
The brain recognizes that feeling pain right now would be detrimental to survival.
Yes. So the brainstem, specifically an area called the periaqueductal gray, pumps out massive amounts of endogenous opioids and serotonin right down into the dorsal horn.
Shutting the gate from above. So the soldier gets shot, the nociceptors are firing frantically, but the brain has locked the spinal gate. No signal gets up to the control room.
And no pain is felt until the battle is over and the brain decides it's finally safe to heal.
Which brings us to this ultimate realization. If your spinal cord is a mixing board, your higher cortical functions, your attention, your emotions, your expectations, they are the hands controlling the master volume faders.
That is exactly right.
So let's lean into those expectations. Because we've seen how physical damage and descending modulation can alter the signal at the spine. But the brain isn't just reacting to what gets through the gate.
No, it's doing something much more complex.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. The brain is actively predicting what is going to happen next. Melzack evolved his gate theory into the neuromatrix model, which eventually integrated into what modern neuroscience calls predictive processing.
And predictive processing, or the Bayesian brain hypothesis, is the concept that absolutely shatters reality as we know it.
Explain that for us.
Well, it suggests that the brain is trapped inside the dark, silent vault of your skull. It has no direct access to the outside world. It only receives electrical impulses.
Right, it's just sitting in the dark.
So to survive, the brain acts as an inference engine. It constantly generates a simulation of what it expects is happening in the body, based on memory, context, and visual cues.
So it's guessing.
Highly educated guessing. Incoming sensory data isn't used to build the picture from scratch. The sensory data is just used to lightly correct the brain's pre-existing simulation.
Okay, think about the last time you got a paper cut. You're sliding your finger along an envelope, and it slices the skin. Very often, you don't feel a thing in that exact millisecond.
Right, there's a delay.
But a second later, you look down. Your eyes register the visual data of the sliced skin and maybe a drop of blood. And the moment you see the blood, the stinging suddenly explodes.
Yes, because your visual cortex updated your brain's threat prediction. The brain said, oh, look at that visual evidence of damage. We need to protect this finger immediately. And it switches the pain on.
The visual confirmation changes the prior expectation, and the brain synthesizes the feeling of pain to match the new visual data.
Now take that mechanism and apply it to a clinical setting, and you begin to understand the sheer biological power of expectation.
Like anticipating a shot at the doctor's office.
Exactly. If a patient expects a medical procedure to be agonizing, their brain generates a high-threat prediction.
The guard in the control room is already hitting the panic button before the camera even turns on.
That's it. And because that prediction of pain is so strong, when the actual sensory input arrives, the brain amplifies it to match the expectation.
So two people can receive the exact same physical stimulus, but the person who expects severe pain will genuinely experience a higher intensity of suffering.
Driven entirely by top-down predictive processing, yes.
Okay, wait, so if I walk into a clinic and the doctor gives me a pill, but they secretly give me a sugar pill, a placebo, and they tell me, this is a profound experimental painkiller. It's going to wipe out your pain in 10 minutes.
And you believe them.
I take it, and my headache vanishes. Historically, people, and even doctors, dismiss that. They say, oh, it's just the placebo effect. It was all in your head. You tricked yourself. Is it fake?
What's fascinating here is that the phrase, it's all in your head, is clinically toxic. It implies the pain relief is fake or purely imaginary.
Right, like you're gullible.
But the work of Fabrizio Benedetti at the University of Turin fundamentally dismantled the idea that placebos are just psychological parlor tricks. He proved that the placebo effect is a verifiable neurochemical event.
Okay, let's break down his methodology, because it is brilliant. How did he prove that a sugar pill causes a real biological change?
Benedetti focused on that descending pain modulatory system we mentioned earlier, the brain's ability to release its own internal painkillers, endogenous opioids.
Okay.
He took patients suffering from postoperative pain, First, he demonstrated the baseline placebo effect. If a doctor walks in, makes eye contact, and explicitly injects a saline solution while telling the patient it's a powerful painkiller.
The patient's pain significantly decreases.
Exactly. Because the ritual of the doctor, the white coat, the needle, all of those visual and social cues convince the brain's predictive processing engine that relief is arriving.
The threat level drops.
The brain says the threat is handled, and it signals the periaqueductal gray in the brainstem to flood the central nervous system with endogenous opioids. The brain runs its own internal pharmacy.
Okay, but how do we know it's actual opioids and not just them saying they feel better?
To prove this wasn't just subjective reporting, Benedetti introduced a drug called naloxone. Naloxone is a powerful opioid antagonist.
Okay.
Its molecular structure allows it to bind to the mu-opioid receptors in your brain and block them completely. It's the exact same drug used to reverse heroin overdoses.
So that's like a microscopic cap on the receptor. No opioids can get in.
Right. So Benedetti takes these patients who are experiencing profound pain relief from a placebo. They feel great. He then secretly administers naloxone into their 5E line.
And what happens?
Within minutes, the patient's pain comes roaring back. The placebo analgesia is completely destroyed.
Wait, so naloxone, a drug that strictly blocks physical opioids, destroyed the placebo effect?
Exactly.
That is the smoking gun. It proves that the placebo effect was being generated by physical opioids. The brain manufactured real chemical morphine in response to a belief.
Belief is a biological event. This radically alters how we view medical care. It means a clinician's bedside manner isn't just about customer service or being nice.
Right, the warmth of the doctor, their confidence in the diagnosis, the cleanliness of the hospital room, these are all sensory data points that feed into the patient's predictive processing.
A confident, empathetic doctor is literally acting as a catalyst for the patient's endogenous opioid system. They are providing chemical pain relief through their words and their presence.
Or, conversely, a dismissive, rushed doctor who uses terrifying medical jargon is feeding the patient's threat prediction.
The nocebo effect.
Right. They induce the nocebo effect, literally amplifying the patient's pain by increasing their anxiety and shutting down those descending inhibitory pathways.
And this right here is the foundation of the biopsychosocial model of pain. The old biomedical model looked at the human body like a car engine.
If the engine is making a noise, you find the broken belt, you replace it, and the noise stops.
Exactly. It viewed pain as a purely structural mechanical defect in the tissues.
But the biopsychosocial model says you cannot separate the biology of the tissue from the psychology of the mind or the sociology of the environment. They are all happening simultaneously, constantly feeding back into the neuromatrix.
So let's dissect the psychological component first. In chronic pain research, there is a specific cognitive variable that consistently predicts how much a patient will suffer, regardless of what their MRI shows.
And that's catastrophizing. I think everyone listening has experienced a mild version of this.
Oh, absolutely.
If you get a weird twinge in your back and suddenly you're spiraling, what if this is a slip disc? What if I need surgery? What if I can't work anymore? My life is over. It's that runaway train of rumination, magnification of the threat, and a profound sense of helplessness.
Functionally, catastrophizing activates the body's sympathetic nervous system. You are flooding your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. You're putting the amygdala, the brain's fear center, on high alert.
And what does that do to the pain system?
When the nervous system is saturated with stress hormones, the peripheral nerves actually become more sensitive. Their firing threshold drops.
So the psychological panic literally makes the physical nerves more prone to firing. The paranoia of the security guard is turning up the sensitivity of the cameras.
And this creates a devastating feedback loop. The pain triggers the catastrophic thoughts. The catastrophic thoughts trigger the stress response. The stress response sensitizes the nervous system. The sensitized nervous system amplifies the pain. The cycle accelerates.
Which is why cognitive behavioral therapy is heavily utilized in modern pain management. By teaching a patient to identify and interrupt catastrophic thought patterns, you aren't just making them feel happier, you are biologically downregulating their sympathetic nervous system.
You're decreasing the peripheral sensitivity of their nociceptors.
Exactly. That covers the psychological. But the social aspect of the biopsychosocial model is where it gets incredibly visceral. Our social environment alters our physical hardware.
There are these fascinating laboratory experiments involving thermal pain. Researchers apply a controlled heat probe to a participant's arm until it becomes painful.
Okay, sounds unpleasant.
Very. If the participant is in the room alone, they report a specific threshold of pain. But if their romantic partner is brought into the room and simply sits quietly holding the participant's hand during the thermal stimulus,
The pain ratings drop.
they drop significantly. Functional MRI scans show that the presence of a supportive partner actually dampens the activation in the brain's threat processing centers.
Because of oxytocin, right?
Yeah.
The hormone associated with social bonding and attachment actively inhibits the amygdala. Having a hand to hold literally cools down the brain's panic response.
It's incredible.
And obviously, the dark mirror to this is that social isolation does the exact opposite.
Chronic loneliness places the nervous system into a state of hypervigilance. From an evolutionary perspective, an isolated mammal is a dead mammal.
Right, you're vulnerable to predators.
So the nervous system stays on high alert, scanning for threats, which means its pain thresholds are universally lowered. An isolated patient will experience significantly more severe pain from the exact same physical pathology as a socially supported patient.
Wow. Okay, so we've built this incredibly complex picture of how a healthy, functioning nervous system processes pain. It gates it, it predicts it, it modulates it based on our stress and our relationships. Right. But what happens when the hardware actually breaks? What happens when the biological volume knob gets snapped off and the alarm never stops ringing?
Now we are stepping into the territory of chronic pain, which is, without exaggeration, a global health crisis.
We're talking about 1 in 5 adults in developed nations living with severe, daily, unrelenting pain.
And to understand why we have failed these patients so profoundly, we have to look at the work of researchers like Clifford Wolff, who categorize the fundamental difference between nociceptive pain and nociplastic pain.
Let's define those, because a lot of people living with chronic pain might have never even heard the term nociplastic. Nociceptive chronic pain makes intuitive sense, right?
Yes.
You have a pathology that isn't healing. You have severe osteoarthritis, and the cartilage in your knee has completely worn away. Bone is grinding on bone. Every time you take a step, you're causing mechanical tissue damage. The nociceptors are firing because there is an active fire to report.
That is nociceptive. The pain system is functioning normally. It's the tissue that is failing. But nociplastic pain is a terrifying shift.
How so?
Nociplastic pain occurs when the primary pathology is not the tissue, but the nervous system itself. The original injury might have healed 5 years ago. There's no more tissue damage. But the pain is still there, and it is spreading.
Because the spinal cord itself underwent a structural change. Let's explain central sensitization. What is actually happening in the dorsal horn when the system breaks?
Okay, so when you sustain a severe injury or when you have prolonged nerve irritation, those C fibers we talked about bombard the dorsal horn of the spinal cord with high-frequency signals. It's a relentless electrical storm.
It's constant firing.
Over time, the synapses in the spinal cord undergo a process called long-term potentiation. It's the exact same cellular mechanism your brain uses to form a permanent memory, but here, your spinal cord is memorizing the pain.
The hardware is rewiring itself to be more efficient at transmitting agony.
Down to the molecular level. The bombardment causes magnesium blocks to get kicked out of specific receptors, called NMDA receptors, on the postsynaptic neuron. Massive amounts of calcium flood into the cell.
Making it hyperexcitable.
Right. Furthermore, glial cells, these are immune cells residing in the central nervous system, like microglia and astrocytes, they wake up. They think there's an infection, so they start dumping pro-inflammatory cytokines directly into the spinal fluid.
A chemical soup.
A chemical soup that bathes the neurons, lowering their firing threshold permanently.
So the baseline voltage of the spinal cord is hovering right below the alarm threshold.
Exactly. This leads to 2 distinct clinical phenomena, hyperalgesia and allodynia.
Okay, let's break those down.
Hyperalgesia means a mildly painful stimulus, like a pinprick. Feels like a stab wound. The volume is cranked up. Allodynia is even stranger. It means a completely non-painful stimulus, like the brush of a bedsheet against your leg, a cool breeze. The vibration of riding in a car is suddenly perceived by the brain as agonizing pain.
Because the abated touch fibers we talked about earlier, the ones that are supposed to close the gate, the central sensitization has rewired the switchboard so severely that those touch signals crosstalk and accidentally activate the pain pathways.
The system is so broken that a gentle caress feels like a blowtorch.
And this is where we really have to pause and validate the experience of millions of patients. If you have nociplastic chronic pain conditions like fibromyalgia, certain types of chronic pelvic pain, tension headaches, or nonspecific lower back pain, you have likely sat in a doctor's office.
And the doctor looked at an X-ray or an MRI of your back or your joints, and they said, the imaging is clean, there is no tissue damage, I can't find anything wrong.
And the unspoken, or sometimes directly spoken, implication is that you are making it up, that it is a psychiatric issue.
But the science is unequivocal. Nociplastic pain is a neurobiological disease. The MRI is clean because an MRI looks for broken bones and torn ligaments.
Right. An MRI does not show you the molecular upregulation of NMDA receptors in the dorsal horn. It doesn't show microglial activation.
The tissue is fine, but the nervous system is inflamed and malfunctioning. The pain is 100% real, physically generated, and devastating.
Understanding this neuroplasticity really reveals why our natural instincts fail us when dealing with chronic pain. The paradox of rest.
Oh, this is a huge hurdle for patients.
If you break your ankle, resting is the correct biological imperative. You immobilize it to let the bone knit.
Right.
But if you have central sensitization, the bone is fine, the tissue is fine.
But the brain is still predicting danger. So when the patient feels that immense pain, they engage in fear avoidance behavior. They stop exercising, they stop bending over, they lay on the couch.
Which makes intuitive sense to them.
Of course it does. But by avoiding movement, they are inadvertently validating the brain's false threat prediction. They are telling the control room, you're right, moving is incredibly dangerous. Keep the alarms armed.
Furthermore, the physical deconditioning from lying on the couch weakens the muscles, stiffens the joints, and decreases blood flow, which creates peripheral discomfort that the sensitized nervous system then amplifies into more severe pain.
The fear avoidance model becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of disability.
Which is why the gold standard for rehabilitating nociplastic pain sounds like absolute torture at first glance. Graded exposure.
Yes, graded exposure is a cognitive behavioral approach applied to physical movement. You identify the movements the patient is terrified of, say, bending forward to pick something up.
Okay.
You start with a microscopically small version of that movement. The patient bends forward just an inch. It might trigger a pain flare. But the clinician helps the patient recognize that while it hurts, there is no tissue damage occurring. They are safe.
You are systematically forcing the brain to experience a prediction error. The brain predicts, if I bend over, my spine will shatter. You bend over slightly, the pain flares, but the spine does not shatter.
The brain is forced to slowly update its Bayesian model.
Okay, we moved, we survived. Maybe the threat level isn't as high as I thought.
Over months of slow, graded exposure, you retrain the neural matrix, and the central nervous system slowly begins to desensitize.
But graded exposure takes months of rigorous, uncomfortable work. It requires a highly trained interdisciplinary team of physical therapists, pain psychologists, and physicians working in tandem. And unfortunately, that is not the medical system we built. So what does this all mean? The medical system we built operates on a 15-minute consultation model, looking for a quick biomedical fix to a biopsychosocial problem.
And that systemic failure leads us to the darkest chapter in modern medicine.
We have to address how the medical establishment attempted to treat chronic nociplastic pain with a pharmaceutical sledgehammer, the opioid epidemic.
To view the opioid crisis strictly as an addiction issue is to miss the fundamental medical error that spawned it. Starting in the late 1990s, driven by aggressive pharmaceutical marketing, most notably by Purdue Pharma with OxyContin, there was a paradigm shift in how doctors were taught to treat chronic non-cancer pain.
The pitch was essentially, pain is a vital sign, no patient should suffer, and these new extended-release opioids are safe, effective, and less addictive, which was a catastrophic fabrication.
It was a fabrication that ignored the very neuroscience we are discussing today. Opioids are highly effective for acute, severe, nociceptive pain, like a surgical incision or a traumatic fracture. But when you apply them to a patient with chronic nociplastic pain, you are introducing a profound neurochemical hazard.
Because you aren't fixing the central sensitization, you're just masking it temporarily.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually worse than masking it. You are actively accelerating it. We all understand opioid tolerance, right?
Yes.
You take a pill for a month, your receptors downregulate, and suddenly you need 2 pills to get the same relief.
And we understand physical dependence and the agonies of withdrawal.
But the literature highlights a third, far more insidious cellular mechanism: opioid-induced hyperalgesia, or OIH.
Let's break that down. Hyperalgesia meaning increased sensitivity to pain. Are you saying the painkillers themselves cause more pain?
On a molecular level, yes. When you saturate the mu-opioid receptors with synthetic narcotics for an extended period, the central nervous system attempts to maintain homeostasis. It detects this massive influx of inhibitory signals, so it compensates by aggressively upregulating the excitatory pathways. It produces more of a neurotransmitter called substance P, and it activates those exact same glial cells we talked about, which dump pro-inflammatory cytokines into the spinal cord.
The body is fighting back against the drug by turning up the master volume on the pain system. So over months and years, the baseline sensitivity of the nervous system gets worse and worse. The patient's underlying condition is actually deteriorating because of the medication?
It is the cruelest biological trap imaginable. The patient is in agony. They take a high-dose opioid. The drug temporarily binds the receptors, providing a brief window of relief.
But as the drug wears off,
The underlying excitatory system, which has been supersized by the opioids, comes roaring back. The patient experiences a massive rebound of pain combined with the early stages of withdrawal, which itself manifests as severe body aches.
and the patient genuinely believes their original injury is getting worse, so they ask for a higher dose.
And the physician, seeing a patient in agonizing pain, prescribes a higher dose. The cycle intensifies. This is how you end up with millions of patients who sought help for a bad back, who are now physiologically trapped on massive doses of narcotics that are no longer treating their pain but are actively generating it.
And weaning a sensitized nervous system off of high-dose opioids requires incredibly nuanced, slow, and supported medical care. But as prescribing guidelines eventually tightened, many patients were abruptly cut off.
Plunging them into unbearable withdrawal and driving them toward the illicit market to self-medicate.
Leading directly to the staggering overdose mortality rates we see today. The medical system tried to treat a complex, predictive, biopsychosocial disease with a single chemical molecule, and it resulted in a tragedy.
The clinical literature is clear that the path out of this involves those intensive psychological and rehabilitative treatments we discussed, acceptance and commitment therapy, graded exposure, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Because these interventions actually rewire the central nervous system without chemical dependence.
But the structural barrier remains. Our healthcare system simply does not reimburse or incentivize time. It is infinitely faster and cheaper for an insurance company to approve a bottle of pills than to approve a 3-month interdisciplinary pain rehabilitation program.
Until the financial architecture of healthcare aligns with the neurobiology of pain, patients will continue to fall through the cracks. It's so frustrating. But I want to shift our focus from the spinal cord back up to the brain, because the literature takes us into a territory that fundamentally challenges how we categorize human suffering.
Let's do it.
We use metaphors all the time. We say, he broke my heart, or the sting of rejection, or I was crushed when I didn't get the job. We borrow the vocabulary of physical trauma to describe emotional distress.
For a long time, psychologists assumed that was simply a linguistic convenience, a metaphor. But social neuroscience has definitively proven that the overlap between physical pain and social pain is not metaphorical, it is anatomical.
Let's talk about Matthew Lieberman and Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA. They ran a neuroimaging study that is legendary in the field. How do they actually measure social pain in an fMRI scanner?
They used a deceptively simple computer game called Cyberball. The participant lies inside the fMRI scanner, which is tracking real-time blood flow to different regions of the brain. On a screen inside the scanner, the participant plays a virtual game of catch with 2 other digital avatars.
Okay, seems simple enough.
They are told these avatars are being controlled by 2 real people in another room. For the first few minutes, the 3 of them toss the ball back and forth equally. The participant feels included.
And then the researchers secretly flip the script.
Without warning, the 2 avatars stop throwing the ball to the participant. They only throw it to each other. The participant just watches, completely excluded from the game.
It seems trivial, right? A little video game. But the subjective distress of being ostracized, even in a silly digital game, is immediate and visceral.
Exactly. And Eisenberger and Lieberman looked at the scans and saw massive activation in 2 specific brain regions: the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or the DACC, and the anterior insula.
And why is that significant? Let's functionally explain those areas.
Well, when you experience physical pain, the signal hits the brain and splits into 2 different pathways. The somatosensory cortex handles the sensory data. Where is the pain? How intense is it?
Right.
But the DACC and the insula handle the affective component. They process the distress. They are the regions that make pain feel terrible, urgent, and suffering-inducing.
The suffering part.
Yes. When the participants in the scanner were socially rejected, the exact same regions that encode the suffering of a physical wound lit up like a Christmas tree.
The brain uses the same neural real estate to process a burned hand and a broken heart. That is astonishing. And it leads to a study by psychologist Nathan DeWall that sounds almost like a joke until you realize the rigorous methodology behind it. The Tylenol experiment.
Oh, this one is wild. Acetaminophen, commonly known as Tylenol, is a centrally acting analgesic. It doesn't reduce inflammation at the site of an injury like ibuprofen does. Instead, it acts directly on the central nervous system, specifically dampening activity in the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula.
The exact regions that process social rejection.
Exactly the hypothesis DeWall wanted to test. If social pain and physical pain share the same neurochemical pathways, could a physical painkiller numb a broken heart?
That sounds crazy.
They ran a double-blind, randomized controlled trial. Half the participants took a standard dose of acetaminophen every day for 3 weeks. The other half took a placebo. Every night, the participants filled out detailed psychological logs assessing their daily social interactions, their hurt feelings, and their emotional distress.
And the results after 3 weeks.
The group taking acetaminophen reported a significant linear decline in hurt feelings and social distress compared to the placebo group.
Wait, really? Just from Tylenol?
Yes, and to verify it wasn't just subjective reporting, they put a subset of participants into an fMRI and ran that cyberball rejection game again. The participants who had been taking acetaminophen showed significantly less neural activation in the DACC and the insula when they were socially excluded.
That is mind-bending. The physical painkiller physically numbed the neural circuits of social rejection. I mean, this raises an important question here. Evolution is brutally efficient. Why on earth would natural selection design a brain where getting left out of a social group hurts in the exact same way as breaking an ankle?
Because for a social mammal, isolation is lethal. Look at human infants. They are born completely helpless. A horse can run hours after birth, but a human child requires years of constant, intense parental investment just to survive. If an infant is separated from its caregiver, it will die.
So the attachment system needed an alarm.
It needed an alarm that was impossible to ignore. Evolution rarely builds an entirely new system from scratch if it can co-opt an existing one. The physical pain system was already perfected. It forces the organism to cry out, to seek safety, to alter behavior to avoid death.
So the mammalian attachment system hijacked the physical pain matrix. It repurposed the DACC and the insula.
It made separation distress physically agonizing so that the infant cries out for its mother and so that adult humans constantly seek proximity to the tribe. If you are cast out of the hunter-gatherer tribe on the savannah, you freeze to death or get eaten.
Social rejection feels like a life-threatening injury because, biologically speaking, it is one.
It reframes our entire understanding of emotional trauma. When a teenager is intensely bullied at school or when someone goes through a devastating divorce, society tends to treat it as a purely psychological, invisible issue. Just get over it. Time heals all wounds.
But neurologically, that person is experiencing a continuous barrage of pain signals in the anterior cingulate cortex. Their brain is processing a severe systemic injury.
Which brings us to a highly practical clinical implication of all this complex neuroscience. How do we communicate what is happening inside the vault of our skull to the outside world?
Right, the language of suffering. Because pain is 100% subjective and internally constructed, it is fundamentally invisible to a clinician.
And that creates an immense burden on language. When a patient walks into a clinic, the entire trajectory of their medical care hinges on their vocabulary. This is where the English language is both a remarkably precise tool and a potential barrier.
Let's talk about the clinical categorization first. The medical vocabulary separates pain by mechanism. As we discussed, there is nociceptive pain caused by tissue damage. There is nociplastic pain caused by central sensation. And there is neuropathic pain, which is distinct.
Right, that's pain caused by a direct lesion or disease of the somatosensory nervous system itself, like a pinched nerve in your spine or diabetic neuropathy in your feet.
But the patient doesn't use the word neuropathic when they come in.
No. The patient uses phenomenological vocabulary. They describe the sensory quality of the experience. And this is where the genius of Ronald Melzack returns. He didn't just give us the gate control theory. He also created the McGill Pain Questionnaire,
which is one of the most widely used diagnostic tools in the world. But how does a questionnaire diagnose a biological mechanism?
Melzack categorized pain descriptors into specific dimensions. For example, if a patient describes their pain as burning, shooting, or like an electric shock, neurologists recognize those specific words as strong indicators of neuropathic pain. Those words describe the misfiring of damaged nerve fibers.
Oh, I see.
If a patient describes the pain as a dull, throbbing ache, That typically points to deep tissue inflammation or nociceptive pain carried by slow C fibers. If they describe it as sharp, stabbing, or piercing, that indicates acute nociceptive signals traveling on those fast A delta fibers.
So the adjective the patient chooses is essentially a diagnostic clue pointing to the specific neural pathway that is currently screaming.
Precisely. And the McGill questionnaire also measures the affective dimension, how the pain makes you feel. Words like exhausting, sickening, terrifying, or punishing. This gives the clinician insight into how active the patient's anterior cingulate cortex and amygdala are.
It measures the catastrophizing and the emotional distress, which dictates whether the patient needs aggressive psychological intervention alongside physical therapy.
But this highlights a terrifying vulnerability in healthcare. What happens if the patient doesn't have access to that precise vocabulary?
Right. If you are an English as a second language learner navigating a complex medical system, or a child who doesn't know the difference between burning and throbbing, or an elderly patient with cognitive decline.
If you cannot articulate the precise phenomenological quality of your invisible suffering, the clinician cannot deduce the mechanism.
And if they cannot deduce the mechanism, they prescribe the wrong treatment. They might prescribe a standard anti-inflammatory for what is actually a neuropathic condition, leaving the patient in agony while believing the medication just didn't work.
The language of pain dictates the equity of care. We have to train clinicians not just to look at X-rays, but to deeply, actively listen to the linguistic nuances of a patient's story.
Because the story is the only window we have into the neuromatrix. Wow. We've covered an immense landscape of biology and psychology today.
We really have.
We started by dismantling the myth of the fire alarm, proving that pain is not a direct reflection of tissue damage. It is a highly subjective, protective decision made by a predictive brain.
We saw how that control room in the brain can be hacked, how descending modulatory pathways can manufacture endogenous opioids through the power of expectation and placebo, or how they can amplify pain through the stress of catastrophizing.
We dove into the microscopic rewiring of the spinal cord in central sensitization, proving that chronic nociplastic pain is a genuine neurobiological disease that requires retraining the brain, not just masking it with opioids.
And we learned that the tragedy of the opioid crisis was treating a sensitized nervous system with a drug that ultimately made it more sensitive.
We connected the evolutionary dots between the agony of a broken bone and the distress of a broken heart, seeing how social isolation triggers the exact same neural hardware as physical trauma.
It is a profound realization that changes how you interact with your own biology.
So the next time you feel a sudden ache, or the sting of a paper cut, or even the heavy sinking feeling being left out of a conversation, I encourage you to pause. Recognize that what you are feeling isn't just a passive reaction to a mechanical world. It is an active, brilliant, fiercely protective construction by your brain, trying its absolute best to keep you alive.
And as we consider how deeply our neurobiology is intertwined with our environment, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider.
Absolutely, go ahead.
We know that the brain uses predictive processing to calculate threat. We know that social exclusion directly activates the physical pain matrix in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And we know that chronic loneliness puts the nervous system into a state of hypervigilance, lowering pain thresholds globally. As we look at a society undergoing an unprecedented epidemic of digital isolation and social fragmentation, we have to ask a terrifying question.
Yeah.
Are we literally hurting more physically because we are connecting less?
Is the rising tide of chronic pain not just a failure of biomechanics, but a symptom of a socially starving neuromatrix? That is a haunting paradigm shift.
We are so intensely focused on finding the jagged white line on the X-ray, we might be completely blind to the fact that the architecture of our modern lives is what is actually breaking our nervous systems. Thank you for diving into the profound complexities of human suffering with us today. Keep questioning the alarm bells in your mind. We will catch you on the next deep dive.